The artificial gravity generators hummed quietly beneath the arched corridors of the Carindel Interspecies Educational Research Station. Positioned delicately within the stellar belt of Tau Meridin, the station had become the galaxy's premier institution for theoretical physics education among advanced species. Its crystalline walls shimmered with equations dancing in holographic displays, while neural interface terminals lined the corridors like silent sentinels. Caleb Danner's footsteps echoed against the polished floor, the sound betraying his physical presence in a way that distinguished him from most other students. While his alien colleagues glided through the hallways with neural augmentation aiding their every move, Caleb walked, one foot after another, clutching an analog notebook against his chest. The Earth Scholarship recipient was an anomaly at Carindel. No neural interfaces, no cognitive augmentation chips, no technological enhancements whatsoever. Just raw human intellect and a stubborn persistence that was considered either charming or primitive, depending on who you asked. Primitive thinker approaching, whispered Igra, a gaseous entity contained within an anti-gravity sphere, their communication implant translating the thought ripples into standard galactic common. Look, he's still using manual memory storage. Caleb pretended not to hear as he slipped into the lecture chamber for advanced relativistic phenomena. He'd grown accustomed to being the subject of whispered derision. Earth was still considered a post-industrial lagging world, having only recently been granted limited participation in the galactic academic community. The chamber darkened as Professor Helixar materialized at the center podium. The multidimensional being's physical form shimmered between states, sometimes appearing as a collection of geometric patterns, other times as a vaguely humanoid figure composed of interlocking light fields. After 800 years of teaching, Helixar had developed a flair for dramatic entrances. Today marks the conclusion of our temporal mechanics module, the professor announced, voice resonating through both air vibrations and neural pathways simultaneously. And I regret to inform you that I will no longer be teaching the practical applications of time dilation. A murmur of surprise rippled through the chamber. After centuries of attempting to move beyond theoretical understanding, I must acknowledge that the concept remains stubbornly resistant to experimental demonstration at the educational level. The mathematical framework is clear, but none of my students have ever truly internalized the physical reality of time's malleability. Helixar's form briefly collapsed into a tight spiral of disappointment before reforming. We will proceed to quantum entanglement next week. The final examination on relativistic effects will consist of a visualization project only. As students began filing out, Caleb remained seated, his analog pencil tapping thoughtfully against his paper. When the chamber had nearly emptied, he approached the podium where the professor appeared to be dissolving into a contemplative state. "Professor Helixar," Caleb began, his voice cutting through the silence. "I was wondering if I might request access to your experimental data from previous attempts at time dilation demonstrations." The professor's form coalesced with interest. "For what purpose, Terran?" "I'd like to attempt building a physical model," Caleb replied. "Something that demonstrates the effect tangibly rather than just mathematically." A ripple of what might have been laughter emanated from Helixar's form. "Young human, species far more technologically advanced than yours have tried and failed. Without quantum stabilizers and temporal isolation fields, the effect would be too minute to detect." "Maybe that's been the problem," Caleb suggested. "Too much technology obscuring the fundamental principles." From across the room, several lingering students had overheard. Igra's containment sphere bobbed with amusement. "The primitive wants to build a time dilation model with his hands," they broadcasted loudly. "Perhaps he'll use sticks and stones next." "Waste of evolutionary potential," added another student, an insectoid creature whose translucent exoskeleton housed visible neural enhancement nodes. Typical of pre-integration civilizations. Helixar's form shimmered in what seemed like consideration. "Very well, Terran Danner. I'll transfer the experimental parameters to your primitive data system. Consider it an exercise in understanding your species' limitations." Caleb nodded, accepting both the data crystal and the backhanded permission with equal grace. Thank you, Professor. As he left the chamber, the laughter of his peers followed him down the corridor, but Caleb's mind was already racing with possibilities. In his notebook, he began sketching a contraption, based not on quantum theory, but on Earth's forgotten Haffel-Keating experiment, the 1971 atomic clock test that had measured time dilation using nothing more sophisticated than airplane travel and precise timepieces. The restricted maintenance access to Carindale's lower levels required minimal neural authentication, which ironically made it easier for Caleb to slip through using mechanical override codes he'd figured out during his first month on station. The Academy's obsolete technology storage bay, colloquially known as the Extinction Vault, housed equipment considered too primitive for current use. Among the discarded items, Caleb discovered treasures: mechanical rotors from old ventilation systems, copper wire with half-burned insulation, magnetic cores from decommissioned power converters, and, most valuable of all, a pair of identical mechanical chronometers calibrated for astronomical observation, relics from an era before neural timekeeping became standard. Day after day, as his classmates spent their free hours perfecting neural visualizations of relativistic equations, Caleb smuggled parts back to his quarters. His room soon resembled an archaeological dig of forgotten technology rather than a student's living space. "Your quarters violate Safety Protocol 739 Alpha," announced the station's maintenance supervisor, a bipedal mechanoid whose entire consciousness was distributed through the station's regulatory systems. "Unauthorized technology assemblage detected." "It's just a final project," Caleb explained, standing protectively in front of his half-assembled contraption. "Educational materials." The supervisor's optical sensors pulsed skeptically. "These materials are classified as hazardous antiquities. Confiscation is mandatory." "Please," Caleb said, desperation creeping into his voice. "I've been working on this for weeks. It's important. Antiquated mechanical devices have no educational value," the supervisor countered, extending a collection appendage. "What if I get faculty approval?" Caleb bargained quickly. "Would that satisfy protocol?" The supervisor paused, internal systems consulting the regulatory framework. "Faculty authorization would supersede hazard classification. You have 26 station hours to obtain approval." After the supervisor departed, Caleb worked feverishly through the night. By morning, his prototype was operational, if barely. The design consisted of a high-speed centrifugal rotor, carefully balanced to spin one of the chronometers at near-relativistic local acceleration, while the identical control timepiece remained stationary. The magnetic containment field he'd cobbled together from scavenged parts struggled to maintain stability, causing sporadic vibrations throughout the device. When he activated it for the first test run, the system lasted exactly 12 seconds before catastrophic oscillation threw the entire apparatus against the wall of his quarters, shattering one timing crystal and bending the primary rotor shaft beyond repair. Caleb sat amidst the smoking ruins of his first attempt, a wave of despair washing over him. Perhaps the others were right. Perhaps this was beyond his capabilities, beyond the capabilities of mechanical demonstration altogether. But as he examined the wreckage, he noticed that the chronometer crystal, though shattered, had recorded a measurable discrepancy before destruction. The time difference was infinitesimal, far too small to be useful as demonstration evidence, but it existed. The principle was sound. The execution needed refinement. For the next 3 weeks, Caleb barely attended lectures. Instead, he rebuilt his apparatus with crucial modifications. He reinforced the structural supports, redesigned the magnetic containment system, and most importantly, incorporated a vibration dampening system using principles from ancient Earth seismology. "You're missing crucial educational modules," warned his assigned academic advisor, an energy being who communicated through pulsating light patterns. "Your neural absorption rates are already insufficient without compounding the problem through absence." "I'm learning more this way," Caleb insisted, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. "I'm understanding relativity by building it, not just memorizing equations." Your methodology is inefficient and archaic, the advisor responded, light patterns shifting to indicate disapproval. The examination requires visualization mastery, not physical constructs. Caleb merely nodded and returned to his work. The second prototype showed improvement, but still failed after 8 minutes of operation when the synchronization mechanism slipped, causing cascading timing errors. The third prototype lasted longer, but couldn't achieve sufficient rotational velocity to produce measurable effects. By his fourth attempt, rumors had spread throughout the student body about the primitive's folly. A small group would occasionally gather outside his quarters, their neural interfaces linking to share amusement at the sounds of mechanical failure emerging from within. I heard he's trying to bend time with spinning metal, one crystalline entity communicated to their peer cluster. Next, he'll claim gravity is caused by invisible strings. Unknown to Caleb, Professor Helixar had been monitoring his progress. The multidimensional being had accessed the maintenance logs, reviewed the material requisitions filed under educational exemptions, and occasionally phased partially into the dimensional plane adjacent to Caleb's quarters to observe the human's work. The professor found something curiously compelling about the Terran's persistence. In 8 centuries of teaching relativistic physics, Helixar had never witnessed a student attempt to prove time dilation through such primitive means. Yet the approach had a certain elegant simplicity that the professor's own multidimensional perspective found refreshing. The day of the final examination arrived. The presentation chamber filled with students, their neural interfaces connecting directly to the central visualization system. One by one, they displayed their understandings of relativistic principles. Magnificent simulations of space-time warping around gravitational wells, elegant mathematical proofs manifesting as multidimensional constructs, theoretical extensions of relativistic frameworks into hypothetical physical systems. Each presentation was technically flawless, visually stunning, and utterly derivative of established theoretical models. Professor Helixar's form undulated with growing disappointment as the presentations continued. When the last scheduled student concluded their visualization, a particularly impressive rendering of time dilation near a rotating black hole, the professor's form condensed into what those familiar with his moods recognized as profound disillusionment. "You've all created beautiful pictures," Helixar said, the words emerging simultaneously as spoken language and neural impression. "But none of you understand time dilation. You've merely drawn it." An uncomfortable silence settled over the chamber. Then, from the back of the room, Caleb Danner stepped forward, pushing a rattling cart that contained what appeared to be little more than a jumble of metal, wire, and magnetic field projectors housed in a transparent safety enclosure. "I believe I was scheduled to present as well." "Professor," Caleb said, his voice steady despite the whispers that immediately erupted around the room. Helixar's form expanded slightly with what might have been surprise. "Indeed, Terran Danner. Please proceed." Caleb positioned his apparatus at the center of the presentation space, connecting its power supply to the chamber's energy outlet. The device hummed to life, a far cry from the sleek neural visualizations that had preceded it. Inside the transparent enclosure, a mechanical arm began to rotate, carrying one chronometer along its circular path while an identical timepiece remained fixed at the base. "This is a physical demonstration of time dilation through relative velocity," Caleb explained as the rotation speed increased. "Based on principles first proven by Haffel and Keating of Earth in 1971, and consistent with Einstein's special relativity. The rotation accelerated, the centrifugal mechanism now spinning so rapidly that the chronometer at its end became a blur. Heat began radiating from the bearings, and a high-pitched whine emanated from the containment field generators. The moving clock is traveling at approximately 20% of the maximum rated structural integrity of these materials," Caleb continued, raising his voice over the noise of the machine. "While that's nowhere near light speed, the precision of these chronometers should demonstrate measurable time dilation over a sufficient operational period." Several students had backed away from the apparatus, their neural interfaces registering alarm at the unfamiliar mechanical sounds and vibrations. Professor Helixar, however, moved closer, multiple sensory appendages extending from his form to analyze the device. After precisely 10 minutes of continuous operation, Caleb activated the shutdown sequence. The rotor gradually decelerated until it came to a complete stop, the entire apparatus now radiating heat and the smell of ozone. With careful movements, Caleb opened the protective enclosure and extracted both chronometers, placing them side by side on a small display platform equipped with a magnification field. The chronometers were synchronized to quantum precision before the experiment, Caleb said, his hands trembling slightly from exhaustion and nervous tension. If relativistic principles hold at this scale, the one subjected to acceleration should now register a different time than the stationary control. He activated the magnification field, and the chronometer faces appeared as vast circular landscapes in the display. To the naked eye, they appeared identical, both showing precisely the same time. A ripple of disappointment passed through the audience, their neural interfaces broadcasting a collective judgment of failure. As expected, murmured Iger from the front row, physical limitations make the experiment meaningless. But Helixar's form had contracted to intense focus, multiple sensory appendages now examining the chronometer display. Activate the peripheral quantum sensor, the professor instructed, voice unusually quiet. Caleb nodded and engaged a small device attached to the display platform, the one component he had been forced to borrow from modern technology. Numbers appeared above the magnification field. Chronometer A, stationary base, temporal reference. Chronometer B, accelerated -0.00002 seconds deviation. The chamber fell silent, even the constant neural background chatter ceasing as the implications registered. 2/100,000ths of a second, Professor Helixar announced, form expanding to fill nearly half the chamber. A minute difference, invisible to biological perception, but present and measurable. Time dilation demonstrated through crude mechanical means. The professor turned to face the assembled students, many of whom were still processing the results through their neural interfaces. This, Helixar said, gesturing toward the simple apparatus, is the difference between visualization and understanding. You cannot see time dilation with your eyes or neural receptors, but you can measure it, even with technology considered primitive by our standards. Helixar's form contracted back to normal proportions before approaching Caleb directly. Time is not meant to be seen, the professor said. It is meant to be measured. In the days that followed, Caleb received no special honors or accelerated advancement offers. His final grade reflected competency in relativistic principles, without particular distinction for methodology. The Academic Advisory Board noted his unconventional approach, but made no changes to the standard curriculum. Yet something had changed at Carindel. Caleb's device was placed in the Academy's historical archive with a small notation. Only mechanical demonstration of time dilation principles achieved without quantum technology. Professor Helixar, for the first time in over a century, began revising lecture materials. The new curriculum included a module entitled Cognitive Friction Principle, Simplicity for Understanding, not Visualization. It featured historical examples of how fundamental physical concepts had often been demonstrated through elegantly simple experiments rather than complex theoretical constructs. Igra, who had been among Caleb's most vocal critics, was observed taking detailed notes of the human's approach. When questioned by their peer cluster, the gaseous entity merely rippled dismissively and changed the subject. As for Caleb Danner, he continued his studies at Carindel with the same quiet determination that had characterized his experiment. When younger students, particularly those from recently admitted species without extensive neural augmentation, struggled with advanced concepts, they began seeking him out. In a quiet corner of the lower commons area, Caleb could often be found surrounded by a small group of students from diverse species, his analog notebook open as he sketched simple diagrams that captured complex physical principles. Think with your hands, he would say, passing around objects to illustrate concepts that neural interfaces rendered as elaborate mathematical structures. Build your understanding from limitations. On one such afternoon, Professor Helixar phased partially into the dimension of the commons, observing unnoticed as Caleb guided a group of first-cycle students through a demonstration of quantum uncertainty using nothing more sophisticated than polarized light filters and a beam splitter salvage from obsolete communication equipment. The professor's form rippled with what might have been amusement, or perhaps something deeper. After 8 centuries of teaching, Helixar had forgotten that understanding often came not from perfect simulation, but from imperfect approximation, from a friction between mind and matter that forced true comprehension rather than mere visualization. The lesson of the chronometers had extended beyond time dilation. In the elegant simplicity of Caleb's crude device lay a profound truth about education itself. That knowledge wasn't always best served by technology, that limitations often forced deeper understanding than capabilities, and that sometimes the primitive path led to the most advanced insight. As the years passed, Caleb's reputation at Carindel evolved from primitive thinker to something altogether different. Students and faculty still noted his lack of neural augmentation and limited technological integration, but the terms they used had subtly shifted. He thinks through his hands, they would say, or sometimes, when particularly complex concepts yielded to surprisingly simple demonstrations. He has the Danner perspective. And in Professor Helixar's lectures on relativistic physics, a pair of ancient mechanical chronometers, one that had traveled fractionally less distance through time than its twin, became the introduction to every course on temporal mechanics, a reminder that understanding wasn't about seeing time, but measuring it. In the vast Tamarin stellar belt, amid technologies that could bend light and reshape matter, a human with a notebook had reminded an interstellar academic community of something they had forgotten. That true insight often emerged not from what you could simulate, but from what you could build with your own hand from the pieces others had discarded as junk. This was the truest expression of humanity's gift to the stars. Not technological wizardry or neural interfaces, but the stubborn insistence on understanding through doing, on making reality comprehensible by building it piece by piece from whatever materials lay at hand, and on finding elegant simplicity within the complex machinery of the universe.